I don't need food, sir. I just need a job. Annie's voice shook as the words left her mouth. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, and she had to press her lips together afterward to keep them from trembling too much. She stood in front of the tall iron gate for a long time before anyone noticed her, pacing back and forth, rubbing her hands together, stopping whenever she felt dizzy, then forcing herself to stand still again. She had already been there for hours. A woman eventually approached her from inside the gate. The housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, looked down at the little girl with a mixture of concern and uncertainty. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here so late?" she asked. "I'm here for work," Annie replied quickly, afraid that if she hesitated, she would be sent away. "I heard you need help." Mrs. Finch's expression softened, but she shook her head. "You're too young. We can't hire children." Annie swallowed hard. "I can do things," she insisted. "I can clean. I can carry stuff. I can work really hard." Mrs. Finch hesitated, then disappeared briefly. When she returned, she held a small plate with bread and a piece of fruit. She knelt down and held it out gently. "At least eat something," she said. "You must be hungry." Annie stared at the food. Her stomach twisted painfully, and for a moment her hands lifted on their own, almost reaching for it. Then she stopped herself and shook her head. "No, ma'am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't." Mrs. Finch frowned. "Why not?" "If I eat, you'll think I just came for food," Annie said. "I really need a job. Please." The housekeeper felt her throat tighten. "Honey, eating doesn't mean that." But Annie was already backing away, clasping her hands together in front of her chest as if holding herself in one piece. "Please," she said again. "Just let me work. I don't need much." Mrs. Finch looked helplessly toward the house. From above, on the second-floor balcony, William Carter had stopped mid-step. He hadn't meant to listen. He hadn't even known why the sound of a child's voice had caught his attention. But now he stood still, staring down, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. A little girl, alone, refusing food. He watched as the housekeeper spoke to her again, watched the child shake her head, watched her clasp her hands tighter, as if afraid they might betray her hunger. Something sharp and unwelcome stirred in his chest. William turned away once, took 2 steps back toward the open doors behind him. This was not his problem. It couldn't be. There were rules for a reason, systems in place, people trained to handle situations like this. Then the girl spoke again, her voice cracking through the quiet. "I don't need food, sir. I just need a job." William stopped. Slowly, he turned back. The words hit him with a force he hadn't expected. They didn't sound rehearsed. They didn't sound manipulative. They sounded desperate, stripped of everything except need and determination. He looked down and saw her shivering violently now, her shoulders drawn in, her head bowed slightly, hands clasped together like a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Without thinking, William brought his own hands together, his fingers locked tight, the same way they had years ago when he stood outside a factory gate, promising he could work longer hours, promising he wouldn't complain, promising he wouldn't be a burden. "My God," he murmured under his breath. He moved before he could talk himself out of it. William descended the stairs, crossed the distance, and stepped out through the gate. The guard stiffened but said nothing. Up close, the girl looked even smaller. "What's your name?" he asked. She jumped slightly at the sound of his voice, then straightened. "Annie," she said. "Sir." "How old are you, Annie?" "6, she answered quickly. "But I can do things, I promise." William felt something tighten painfully in his chest. "Mrs. Finch spoke up nervously. "Sir." I told her. "We can't. It's all right," William said, holding up a hand. His eyes never left Annie. Annie stepped closer, her hands still clasped. "Please," she said, her voice breaking now. "I'll do anything. I'll clean all day. I won't sit down. I won't eat much. I just need a job." The words came faster and faster, tumbling over each other as if she was afraid silence would end the conversation. "I need money for my grandpa," she continued. "He's sick. He can't work anymore. The doctor said he needs medicine, and I tried other places, but they said I was too small. But I'm not lazy. I swear I'm not. William closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, he crouched down so he was level with her. Annie, he said gently, you shouldn't have to beg like this. I'm not begging, she insisted quickly. I'm asking to work. The distinction mattered to her. He could hear it in her voice. You came here alone? He asked. She nodded. Weren't you scared? She hesitated, then answered honestly. Yes. But if I don't try, my grandpa won't get better. The simplicity of it left him speechless. She leaned forward slightly now, desperation overtaking caution. Please, she said again. Just one job. One day, I'll be really good. You won't regret it. William felt the weight of her words settle heavily on him. For years, he had told himself that success came from effort, that anyone willing to work could find a way. Standing in front of Annie, that belief felt fragile, almost cruel. He looked at her clasped hands, her shaking arms. The way she stood as if collapsing would mean failing someone she loved. You don't have to earn the right to exist, he said quietly. She frowned, confused. I just need to earn money, he exhaled slowly. No, he said. What you need right now is to come inside. End quote. Annie froze. Yes, but I can't work if I go inside, she said anxiously. William shook his head. You don't have to work tonight. Her eyes filled with fear. Then why? Because you're cold, he replied, and hungry, and because this isn't how a child should be standing in front of a gate. She searched his face, waiting for the condition, the hidden price. Will you send me away after? She asked softly. William didn't answer right away. Instead, he brought his hands together again, clasping them tightly as he looked at her. I won't turn my back on you, he said at last. Not tonight. Annie's hands slowly loosened. Okay, she whispered, and in that moment, William Carter knew that whatever came next, walking away would no longer be an option. William Carter walked ahead of Annie, not too fast, not too slow, acutely aware of the small footsteps trailing behind him. He did not look back at first. He had learned long ago that sudden attention could frighten people who were already on edge. Instead, he let the rhythm of their steps settle, let the silence stretch just enough to feel natural. Annie crossed the threshold cautiously, as if she expected an invisible line to trigger a reprimand. Her eyes flicked from side to side, taking in everything at once: the polished floor beneath her worn shoes, the soft light that made the walls glow, the quiet that felt different from the silence of the street. This silence was padded, deliberate, the kind that belonged to places where nothing was allowed to break. She stopped just inside the door. Take your coat off if you want, William said, glancing back at her. You're safe here. Annie nodded but did not move. She kept her arms close to her body, fingers digging into the fabric of her sleeves. Safe was a word adults liked to use. It did not always mean the same thing. Mrs. Finch cleared her throat softly. Sir, I'll bring something warm, she said. Thank you, William replied. Annie's head snapped up at the word warm. Mrs. Finch disappeared into the kitchen, and the sound of distant movement followed: pots, water, a familiar domestic rhythm. Annie listened intently, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction before tensing again, as if she had caught herself letting go too soon. William gestured toward a chair near the wall. You can sit. She shook her head immediately. I'm okay. You've been standing all night. I don't mind, she said quickly. I can stand. He studied her for a moment. He had seen this before, though not in years. The fear that sitting meant staying too long. The fear that staying too long meant being asked questions. Questions that led to places children did not want to go. All right, he said, then stand. But you don't have to hold yourself so tight. Annie glanced down at her hands, still clasped together. Slowly, she let them fall to her sides. Her fingers twitched, uncertain what to do with the sudden freedom. Mrs. Finch returned with a bowl of soup, steam rising gently into the air. The smell reached Annie before she could stop it, and her stomach betrayed her with a quiet sound. She flinched, embarrassed. Mrs. Finch set the bowl on the table. No pressure, she said kindly. It's just here. Annie stared at it, then looked up at William, searching his face. You don't have to eat if you don't want to, he said. But you can. There was a long pause. Finally, Annie took one small step forward, then another. She stood in front of the bowl, hands hovering uncertainly. She did not reach for the spoon right away. Instead, she looked back at William again. Is it okay if I eat slow? She asked. He blinked. Of course, she nodded, as if confirming a rule, and picked up the spoon with care. Each movement was deliberate, measured. She took a small sip, paused, waited. Nothing happened. No one scolded her. No one took the bowl away. After a few moments, she took another sip. William watched quietly, a familiar ache settling into his chest. He had once eaten like that, counting seconds between bites, listening for footsteps that meant he had stayed too long. Mrs. Finch hovered nearby, pretending to tidy things that did not need tidying. Sir? She said softly. Should I call someone? Social services? Perhaps. William did not answer immediately. His gaze remained on Annie. What would happen if you did? He asked. Mrs. Finch hesitated. They'd take her somewhere. A shelter. Or foster care. Annie froze mid-bite. William saw it instantly, the stiffening of her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward the door. She did not cry. She did not speak, but her entire body leaned subtly away from the room, as if preparing to run. If this moment touched you even a little, please take a second to like this video. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And subscribe to the channel so stories like this can keep reaching the people who need them most. No, William said firmly. Not tonight. Willowed. Mrs. Finch nodded, understanding more than she said. She stepped back, giving them space. Annie swallowed hard and set the spoon down. Am I in trouble? She asked. No, William said. You're not in trouble. Are you going to make me leave? Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. William crouched again, lowering himself to her level. Not tonight, he repeated. And not without talking to you first. She studied him carefully, as if memorizing his face. People say that, she said quietly. Sometimes they change their mind. That's true, he admitted. Her honesty caught him off guard. Most children her age softened things, hid what they knew. Annie did not. I won't change my mind tonight, he said. That's a promise I can keep. She nodded slowly and picked the spoon back up. After a few more bites, she spoke again. If I can't work, she said. Can I help anyway? Help how? I can wash my bowl, she offered. Or sweep. William almost smiled. Almost. You don't owe me anything, he said. Eating doesn't create a debt. She frowned at that, as if trying to understand a foreign idea. My grandpa says nothing is free, she said. William leaned back slightly. Your grandpa sounds like a smart man. He is, Annie said quickly. He just gets tired now. Silence settled between them. Heavier than before, but not uncomfortable. Where do you live? William asked gently. She hesitated, then answered. A few blocks from here, in an old building. The stairs are broken. Is your grandpa there now? Yes. Alone? She nodded. I told him I'd be back soon. William checked the time instinctively. The thought of an old man waiting in the dark sent another twist through his chest. Finish your soup, he said. Then I'll walk you home. Annie's eyes widened. You will? Yes. She stared at him for a long moment, then looked down at her bowl. This time, she ate a little faster. As she did, William stood and walked a few steps away, pressing his hands together again. He stared at them, remembering other nights, other promises made to himself. He had told himself he would never forget where he came from. He had told himself he would never become the kind of man who looked away. Tonight was testing that vow in ways he had not expected. When Annie finished, she carefully placed the spoon back into the bowl. Thank you, she said. I won't forget this. Unmasked, William met her gaze. You don't have to remember it as a favor, he said. Just remember you matter. She didn't answer. But she didn't look away either. And for William Carter, That was enough to know this was only the beginning. William walked beside Annie as they left the estate, adjusting his pace to match her short, careful steps. The night felt different outside the gate, less controlled, less forgiving. Annie kept close to his side but did not reach for his hand. She seemed to know how easily kindness could change shape if you leaned on it too hard. "I don't live far," she said after a moment, as if worried he might change his mind. "Just past the corner store, the one with the broken sign." William nodded. "You can show me." They moved down the quiet street, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly. Annie glanced back once toward the mansion lights, then forward again, as though afraid to look too long at something she might not be allowed to return to. "Does your grandpa know you came here?" William asked. She hesitated. "He knows I went looking for work. He didn't know where." "Why not?" "He worries," Annie said simply. "If he worries too much, he gets tired." Also, William felt a familiar tightening in his chest, worry that made people smaller, worry that aged them before their time. They reached the building she had described. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, paint peeling away in long strips. Inside, the stairwell was dim, one light flickering weakly. Annie stopped at the bottom step. "He's on the 3rd floor," she said. "The elevator doesn't work." "I can walk," William replied. Annie nodded and started up, gripping the railing with both hands. William followed, noting the way she counted the steps under her breath. By the time they reached the 3rd floor, her breathing was shallow, controlled. She stopped in front of a narrow door and knocked softly. Once, twice. "Grandpa?" she called. There was a pause. Then the sound of movement, slow and unsteady. The door opened a few inches. An older man peered out, his face lined and pale, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into them. When he saw Annie, relief washed over his features, followed immediately by concern. "There you are," he said hoarsely. "I was starting to worry." "I'm okay," Annie said quickly. "I met someone." The man's gaze shifted to William, guarded but polite. "Good evening," he said. "Can I help you?" William extended his hand. "My name is William Carter. I met your granddaughter outside my home." The man's eyes widened slightly. He did not take the hand right away. "She didn't cause any trouble, did she?" he asked, a tremor of fear beneath the question. "No," William said firmly. "She did nothing wrong." Annie stepped forward. "I just tried to find work," she said. "I didn't take food. I promise." The man closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet. "Come in," he said quietly, stepping aside. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, but clean. A thin blanket lay folded on the couch. Pill bottles lined the counter. William took it all in without comment. The man lowered himself carefully into a chair. "My name is Henry," he said. "I'm her grandfather." William nodded. "She told me." Henry looked at Annie. "Did you eat?" She hesitated, then nodded. "A little." Henry exhaled, the sound shaky. "Good." He turned back to William. "I'm sorry she bothered you. She shouldn't be doing this." "She wasn't bothering me," William replied. "She was trying to take care of you." Henry's shoulders sagged at that. "She shouldn't have to." "I know," William said. Silence settled, heavy and honest. After a moment, Henry spoke again. "I used to work," he said. "Warehouse down by the tracks. 30 years. Then my lungs gave out. Doctor says I need medication. Regular. It's expensive." William glanced at Annie. She stared at the floor, hands clasped again. "I tried to manage," Henry continued. "But she sees everything. Kids always do." William nodded slowly. "I'd like to help," he said. "If you'll let me." Henry stiffened. "We don't want charity." William met his gaze. "Neither did I. Once. That seemed to reach him." "I'm not offering a handout," William continued. "I'm offering a solution. Tomorrow, I'll take you both to a clinic I trust. We'll get you checked properly." Henry shook his head. "I can't afford." "You don't have to," William said. "This isn't about money." Annie looked up sharply. "You won't take him away?" she asked. "No," William said. "I won't separate you." She studied his face, searching for cracks. "Promise?" William nodded. I keep my promises. Henry swallowed hard. Why? He asked. Why would you do this for us? William considered the question carefully. Because sometimes the world teaches children lessons it shouldn't, he said. And sometimes adults have to step in and correct that. Henry closed his eyes, a tear slipping free. Annie moved closer to her grandfather, pressing against his side. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her with a tenderness that spoke of years of shared hardship. William stood. I'll come back in the morning, he said. 8 o'clock. Annie's eyes widened. Really? Yes. She nodded, as if locking the time into her memory. At the door, William paused. Annie, he said. She looked up. You didn't do anything wrong tonight, he said. Not by asking, not by hoping. Oh, her lips trembled, but she nodded. Okay. William stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him. As he walked back down the stairs, he felt the weight of the night settle fully on his shoulders. He knew now that this was no longer about a single choice. It was about what came next, and whether he would follow through when it mattered most. William returned to the estate long after midnight, but sleep refused to come. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Annie's voice in his mind. Not the way she begged, but the way she didn't. The way she spoke about work as if it were oxygen. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, he was already dressed. At exactly 8 o'clock, his car pulled up in front of the old building. Annie was waiting on the steps, bundled in the same oversized sweater, her shoes neatly aligned beside her feet, as if she had been afraid they might be in the way. Henry stood behind her, leaning heavily on a cane. You're early, Henry said, surprised. I didn't want to be late, William replied. Annie climbed into the back seat carefully, hands folded in her lap. She did not touch anything. William noticed, and made a quiet decision to say nothing about it. Some lessons needed time to loosen. The clinic was small but clean, the kind of place built on reputation rather than marble floors. Nurses greeted William by name, but he waved off the familiarity. Today wasn't about him. Annie stayed close to her grandfather as they waited. When a nurse called Henry's name, Annie's grip tightened. I'll be right here, William said. Both of you. The examination took longer than Annie expected. She sat rigid in her chair, eyes fixed on the hallway. Every time a door opened, she flinched. When Henry finally emerged, he looked exhausted but calmer. The doctor says it's bad, he said quietly, but not hopeless. Annie exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath for years. They'll start treatment today, William said, and we'll make sure you get your medication regularly. Henry shook his head slowly. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, William replied. Just focus on getting better. Wear the goad. On the drive back, Annie spoke for the first time since entering the clinic. Are we in trouble? She asked. No, William said. For not having money? She pressed. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. No. For being human? No one should be punished for that. She absorbed this quietly, as if storing it away for later. Back at the building, Henry was visibly weaker. The doctor had warned that the first days would be hard. Come stay at my place, William said suddenly. Henry stiffened. That's not necessary. It is, William replied gently. At least until you're stronger. Annie looked between them, fear creeping into her eyes. Will we have to work there? She asked. No, William said immediately. You won't work. You'll rest. She frowned. But I want to help. You already have, he said, by being honest. Henry finally nodded. Just for a little while, he said, until I can stand on my own again. Is naughty. The guest room was modest compared to the rest of the house, but to Annie it felt impossibly large. She stood just inside the doorway, unsure where to place herself. This is yours, William said. Both of yours. Annie walked to the bed, touching the blanket with one finger as if testing whether it was real. Can Grandpa sleep here too? She asked. Yes. That night, Annie refused to lie down until Henry was settled. She perched on the edge of the bed, watching him breathe, counting each rise and fall of his chest. William watched from the doorway. You don't have to stay awake, he said softly. I want to, Annie replied. In case he needs me. You can rest, William said. I'll be here. She looked at him for a long moment. You won't leave? No, he said. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Satisfied, she finally lay down, curling into herself like a question mark. William stepped back into the hallway, closing the door gently. He leaned against the wall, pressing his hands together again, the old gesture returning without thought. He had built an empire on control, on knowing the outcome before the risk. Tonight had offered him none of that. Only a child who believed work was the price of love, and an old man who believed dignity meant refusing help. William understood both too well. He straightened and walked toward the kitchen, already planning phone calls, appointments, quiet rearrangements of a life that no longer felt as simple as it had yesterday. And somewhere down the hall, Annie slept for the first time in a long while without one eye open. Morning arrived quietly in the Carter estate, filtered through tall windows and softened by thick curtains. The house had its own rhythm at dawn, measured, restrained, but that morning something in it felt altered, as if the walls themselves were listening. William was already awake when Mrs. Finch entered the kitchen. They slept through the night, she said softly, setting a mug down in front of him. Both of them, he nodded, relief settling into his shoulders. Thank you. Mrs. Finch hesitated, then spoke again. The little girl woke once. Just for a minute. She asked if her grandfather was still breathing. William closed his eyes briefly. And I told her yes. She went right back to sleep. He exhaled slowly. Good. From the hallway came the faint sound of footsteps. Careful ones. Annie appeared in the doorway, hair slightly tangled, clutching the sleeve of her sweater as if unsure whether she was allowed to be awake yet. William looked up. Good morning, T-Dax. She froze for half a second, then nodded. Morning, sir. You don't have to call me that, he said. You can call me William. She considered this. Okay, she said cautiously. William. Mrs. Finch smiled and slid a small plate onto the table. Breakfast, she said. Eggs and toast. Annie glanced at it, then back toward the hallway. Can I check on Grandpa first? Of course, William said. She padded down the hall, stopping at the guest room door. She opened it just enough to peer inside, watching Henry's chest rise and fall. Only then did she relax. When she returned, she sat on the edge of the chair instead of fully in it, hands folded neatly in her lap. You can sit back, Mrs. Finch said gently. Annie shook her head. I'm okay. William watched without comment. Pushing too hard only hardened habits like these. As Annie ate, small and precise bites, Henry appeared in the doorway, leaning on his cane. Annie jumped up instantly. You should stay in bed, she said. I'm fine, Henry replied, though the effort of standing showed in his face. He nodded to William. Morning. Good morning, William said. How are you feeling? Henry shrugged. Like an old man who shouldn't have ignored doctors. Annie frowned. You didn't ignore them, she said. You just didn't have money. Henry winced slightly. William caught the look and intervened gently. You're starting treatment today, he said. That's what matters. We couldn't know distanders. Henry nodded. I don't know how to repay you. You don't, William said. That's settled. After breakfast, William made phone calls from his study. He spoke quietly, efficiently, arranging follow-up appointments, medication deliveries, temporary care. He did not mention charity. He did not mention favors. He spoke as if this were simply another responsibility he had accepted. From the doorway, Annie watched him. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. This wasn't hesitation. This was commitment. When he finished, he found her still standing there. You don't have to wait, he said. I wasn't, she replied. I was just staying. He nodded. That's allowed here. She looked surprised by that. Later that morning, a social worker called. Mrs. Finch answered, then looked toward William. She says she needs to speak with you, she said quietly. About the child. William took the phone. Yes, he said calmly. I understand. No, I'm not her guardian. Yes, I'm aware of the regulations. Annie hovered at the edge of the hallway, listening without meaning to. Her stomach tightened with each pause. William continued. She is safe. She is with family. No, she is not being employed. Yes, I will cooperate. He ended the call and turned to find Annie staring at him, fear unmistakable in her eyes. They're going to take me, she said, not asking. William crouched in front of her immediately. No one is taking you anywhere today. But you said, I said I'd cooperate, he said gently. That doesn't mean I'll disappear, she bit her lip. People say that too. I know, he replied. That's why I'll show you instead of just telling you. She watched him closely, as if trying to learn the difference. In the afternoon, Henry rested while Annie sat at the kitchen table with a box of old pencils Mrs. Finch had found. She drew quietly, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. William paused beside her. What are you drawing? She slid the paper toward him. It was a simple picture. 3 figures standing close together. One tall, one bent, one small, but centered. That's Grandpa, she said, pointing. That's you. And the little one? He asked, though he already knew. That's me, she said. I'm in the middle, so I can help both. Something tightened in his throat. You shouldn't have to be in the middle all the time, he said softly. She shrugged. Someone has to be. He straightened slowly. Not here, he said. Not anymore. She looked up at him, searching his face for certainty. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Annie stood by the window, watching the light change. Do I have to leave tomorrow? She asked suddenly. William joined her. No. What about next week? No. She turned to him fully now. What about when Grandpa gets better? He paused, choosing his words with care. Then we'll decide together what comes next. No surprises. She nodded, absorbing this new idea that decisions could include her. As night settled, Annie helped Mrs. Finch carry napkins to the table. She worked carefully, seriously, as if proving something only she could see. William watched from across the room, hands clasped once again. He realized then that the real danger was not the law, or the questions, or the complications ahead. It was how easily he could have missed her entirely. That night, the house settled into a quiet that felt heavier than before, as if it were holding its breath. Annie lay awake longer than she meant to, staring at the ceiling of the guest room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a place too large, too calm. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked steadily. Each second felt deliberate, counted. She slipped out of bed without making a sound. Barefoot, she padded to the doorway and peeked out. The hallway light was dim but comforting, casting long shadows that didn't move. She hesitated, then took a few steps forward, stopping at the edge of William's study. The door was ajar. He was inside, seated at his desk, a single lamp illuminating a stack of papers. His jacket lay draped over the back of a chair. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands clasped together in front of him, unmoving. Annie watched him for a moment, unsure whether to speak. William sensed her before he saw her. He looked up, surprised but not annoyed. Annie, he said quietly. You should be asleep. She nodded. I tried. What's wrong? She shifted her weight, fingers twisting together again. I just wanted to check, she said. You're still here. He leaned back slightly. I am. She considered this, then took a step closer. You're not mad? About what? For being here, she said. For causing problems. William felt something twist in his chest. You didn't cause any problems, he said. You revealed one. She frowned, not quite understanding. But she accepted the tone. Okay, he gestured toward a chair near the door. Do you want to sit for a minute? She shook her head. I'll stand. All right. They were quiet for a moment. Then Annie spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Are they going to make Grandpa leave? No, William said immediately. Are they going to make me leave? No, I know. She looked up at him, eyes searching. How do you know? William didn't answer right away. He had learned that certainty given too quickly often sounded hollow. Because I won't let that happen, he said finally. And because I'm willing to argue if I have to. She blinked. Argue with who? Anyone who thinks this is simple, he replied. She nodded slowly, as if filing that away. After a moment, she said, I don't like when people talk about us like we're a problem. Oh, William inhaled slowly. Neither do I. They talk like we're a thing, she continued. Not people. He leaned forward slightly. I know. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why did you come down? She asked. You didn't have to. The question landed where it hurt most. William looked down at his hands, clasped together on the desk. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, because once, a long time ago, someone didn't come down for me. Annie's eyes widened. What happened? I figured it out, he said. I always did. But I remember thinking, if just one person had stopped, things would have been different. She absorbed this silently. Did you get in trouble? She asked. He almost smiled. Often. Did you get scared? Yes. She nodded. Me too. The honesty of it hung between them. William straightened. You should get some rest, he said gently. Tomorrow will be a long day. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. At the doorway, she paused. Will you still be here in the morning? Yes. Promise? Yes. Satisfied, she returned to bed. William remained at his desk long after the light in her room went out. He reviewed notes from the clinic, scrolled through emails he hadn't answered, paused on messages from advisors asking questions he hadn't yet decided how to answer. There would be scrutiny. He knew that. There always was when things crossed lines people preferred to keep tidy. The next morning, Henry's condition worsened slightly. His breathing was shallow, his hands shaking as he tried to hold a cup of water. Annie hovered close, eyes sharp, missing nothing. William watched from the doorway as Annie gently guided the cup back to the table. Slow, she said. Like the doctor said. Henry smiled faintly. Bossy, he murmured. Annie did not smile back. I'm helping. I know, Henry said softly. William stepped forward. We're going back to the clinic, he said. Just to be safe. Henry nodded without protest. All right. The ride was quiet. Annie sat between them in the back seat, holding Henry's hand with both of hers. She did not look out the window this time. She watched William's reflection in the glass instead. At the clinic, the nurse recognized them immediately. Back so soon? She asked. Yes, William replied. Something's off. Henry was taken in quickly. Annie stood in the hallway, rigid. They'll help him, William said. They know what they're doing. She nodded, but she didn't move. A doctor emerged after what felt like hours but was only minutes. He needs to stay overnight, she said. It's the right call. Annie's breath caught. Can I stay too? The doctor hesitated. She can, William said calmly. I'll make arrangements. The doctor nodded. All right. Tonight, Dean. Annie didn't speak again until Henry was settled. She sat beside his bed, feet dangling, refusing to let go of his hand. You should eat, Henry said weakly. I will later, she replied. William stood just outside the room, watching through the glass. He saw the way Annie leaned in, the way she counted each breath, the way responsibility had shaped her posture far too early. A nurse approached him quietly. She's very attached, she said. She has to be, William replied. The nurse studied him. Are you family? William hesitated. Not by blood. The nurse nodded. Sometimes that's not the part that matters. That evening, Annie fell asleep in a chair by the bed, head tilted awkwardly to the side. William draped a blanket over her carefully, as if afraid she might break. He stood there for a long time afterward. For years, he had believed distance was safety. That involvement complicated things. That caring too much blurred judgment. Now, watching a 6-year-old child sleep in a hospital chair, he understood something he had avoided for a long time. Some lines were meant to be crossed. Some responsibilities could not be delegated. And some choices, once made, demanded everything that followed. The hospital room smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm linen, a smell Annie was beginning to recognize too well. She woke with a start when a nurse gently adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. For a split second, fear flashed through her eyes, sharp and immediate, before she remembered where she was. Grandpa, she whispered. Henry was still asleep, his breathing steadier than it had been the night before. Relief loosened something tight in her chest. She nodded to the nurse, a small, solemn acknowledgement, and remained very still, as if movement alone might undo the fragile calm. William stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low. "Yes," he said. "I understand. No, she hasn't been left alone. I'm here." He turned slightly away, listening. Annie watched his reflection in the glass, trying to read his face the way she had learned to read adults, searching for the moment their patience thinned, for the signal that something was about to go wrong. "I'm aware of the regulations," William continued. "And I'm not disputing your role. I'm asking for time." There was a pause. William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because pulling her out of here right now would do more harm than good," he said. "Yes, I'll meet with you. He ended the call and exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together before letting them fall to his sides. Annie cleared her throat softly. William turned immediately. "Did I wake you?" She shook her head. "Is someone mad?" "No," he said. "Not mad. Concerned." "About me?" she asked. "About rules," he replied honestly. She frowned. "Rules don't know Grandpa is sick." "No," William agreed. "They don't." Annie looked down at Henry's hand, still wrapped weakly around hers. "Are they going to take me away?" The question was quiet, almost casual. That was what hurt the most. William crossed the room and crouched beside her. "No one is taking you away today." She studied him carefully. "You said today last time too." He nodded. "That's fair. So what about tomorrow?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he chose his words with care. "Tomorrow, we'll talk. Together. And no one will make decisions without explaining them to you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Grown-ups don't usually do that." "I know," he said. "They should." She considered this, then nodded once. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was attention. Later that morning, a woman in a navy blazer appeared at the door. She carried a folder tucked under her arm and wore a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Carter," she said. "I'm Linda Morales. Child Welfare Services." Annie stiffened immediately. William stood. "Of course. Thank you for coming." "I knows." Linda glanced at Annie, then at Henry, still sleeping. "May we speak outside?" William hesitated only long enough to look at Annie. "I'll be right here," he said. "You stay with your grandpa." Annie nodded, but her grip tightened. In the hallway, Linda opened her folder. "She's been observed soliciting work," she said. "Alone. At night." William's voice remained calm. "She was trying to help her family." "I understand that," Linda said. "But intention doesn't erase risk." "Ardor." "No," William said. "Indifference does." Linda paused, studying him. "You're very involved." "I am," he replied. "She's not your responsibility." William met her gaze. "Neither was I. Once." Linda closed the folder slightly. "That doesn't change procedure." "No," he said. "But it should inform judgment." Silence stretched between them. "She's attached to you," Linda said carefully. "That can complicate things." William thought of Annie counting breaths, of her refusing food so she could work. "Detachment didn't protect her," he said. "Connection might." Linda exhaled slowly. "We'll need to assess her living situation." "You can," William said. "With her present." Linda raised an eyebrow. "You want a 6-year-old in a formal meeting?" "I want her treated like a person," he replied. After a moment, Linda nodded. "All right. This afternoon." When William returned to the room, Annie was watching him closely. "She's going to ask questions," he said gently. "You don't have to answer anything you don't understand." Annie nodded. "I know how to answer questions." He winced slightly. "I know you do." The meeting took place in a small consultation room. Annie sat between William and Linda, feet dangling, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Annie," Linda said softly, "do you know why I'm here?" Annie nodded. "Because people think kids can't take care of grown-ups." Linda blinked, surprised. "That's part of it." "I don't want to leave my grandpa," Annie said quickly. "I won't." "No one is saying that," Linda replied. But they might, Annie said. People say lots of things. William rested his hand flat on the table, close enough for Annie to see without touching her. We're figuring this out, he said. Linda asked questions about school, about food, about sleep. Annie answered carefully, honestly, never exaggerating, never minimizing. William noticed how she framed everything in terms of her grandfather's needs, how rarely she mentioned her own. When it was over, Linda closed her folder again. She's resilient, she said. But resilience isn't the same as safety. No, William agreed. It's often the result of lacking it. Linda studied him. You're asking for time. Yes, she nodded slowly. Then here's what I can offer. Temporary arrangement. Supervised. We monitor. You cooperate. William didn't hesitate. Done. Annie looked up at him. What does that mean? It means, he said, turning to her, that you stay with your grandpa, and we all keep talking. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. That evening, Henry was more alert. He smiled faintly when he saw Annie. You didn't go anywhere, he said. She shook her head firmly. I stayed. William watched them from the doorway, the weight of the day settling into his bones. He knew this was only the beginning. Systems rarely loosened their grip easily, but as Annie leaned her head against her grandfather's arm, eyes finally closing in sleep, William understood something with absolute clarity. Protecting her would not be simple, it would not be quiet, and it would not be temporary. The temporary arrangement began quietly, without ceremony or celebration. That was how William wanted it. No declarations, no assumptions, just a steady continuation of what had already begun. Henry remained in the hospital for 2 more days. Annie barely left his side. Nurses learned quickly to speak to her directly, not over her head. She asked precise questions, listened carefully, and corrected anyone who forgot to explain what they were doing. When the doctor finally announced Henry could be discharged, Annie nodded once, as if checking off a long-awaited item from a mental list. You hear that? Henry said weakly. We're going home. Annie looked at William instead. Home, William said gently. For now, is with me. She searched his face, then nodded again. Okay. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Annie watched the city pass by through the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply watched, as if imprinting the route in her memory. At the house, Mrs. Finch had prepared the guest room carefully. Extra pillows, a chair near the bed, a small lamp within reach. Henry lowered himself onto the mattress with a tired sigh. This is more than I deserve, he murmured. This isn't about deserving, William said. It's about recovering. Oh, Annie hovered, adjusting the blanket, aligning the pillows, making sure everything was within Henry's reach before she allowed herself to step back. Annie, William said softly, you don't have to manage everything. She didn't look at him. I know, but she didn't stop either. That evening, Linda Morales arrived for her scheduled check-in. She took notes quietly, observing more than she spoke. She watched how Annie moved around her grandfather, how she anticipated his needs before he voiced them. She watched how William spoke, not instructing, not directing, but explaining. Afterward, Linda closed her folder. She's carrying too much, she said frankly. Yes, William replied. That's why she's here. Linda studied him. You know this will change her expectations. I hope it does, he said. Linda nodded slowly. We'll continue to monitor, she said. But for now, this works. I'm so. When she left, Annie stood in the doorway, waiting. Is she done? She asked. Yes, William said. She'll come back another time. Annie frowned. Will she always come back? Probably, he answered honestly. She considered this, then shrugged. Okay. Later that night, Annie sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Finch prepared soup. She watched every movement closely. You don't have to help, Mrs. Finch said gently. I'm not helping, Annie replied. I'm learning. Mrs. Finch smiled faintly. William observed from a distance. He saw how Annie flinched when a pan clattered too loudly, how she instinctively stepped aside when someone passed behind her. Trauma lived in the smallest gestures. After dinner, William found Annie standing by the back door, staring out into the dark. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She hesitated. "If Grandpa gets better," she said slowly. "Will you stop helping?" William leaned against the doorframe. "Why do you think that?" "Because people help when something is wrong," she said. "When it's fixed, they go away." "That's one way it happens," he admitted. "And this way?" she asked. "This way," he said, "is different." She waited. "I'm not helping because your grandpa is sick," William continued. "I'm helping because you shouldn't have had to do this alone." Her throat tightened. "I didn't mind," she said quickly. "I know," he replied. "That doesn't mean it was fair." Grabbed. She absorbed this in silence. That night, Annie dreamed. She dreamed of standing outside the gate again. Hands clasped, repeating the same words. In the dream, no one came down. The gate stayed closed. Her voice grew smaller and smaller until she couldn't hear it anymore. She woke with a gasp. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Panic surged, sharp, overwhelming. She slid out of bed and crept down the hall, barefoot and silent. William was awake. He always was. He found her standing outside the study, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Annie," he said softly. She looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I thought I was back there," she whispered. He didn't ask where. He already knew. "Come here," he said. She hesitated only a second before stepping closer. He crouched, keeping space between them, letting her decide. "It was just a dream," he said. "But it felt real," she replied. "Yes," he said. "Dreams do that." She swallowed. "If I'm good," she said quietly, "will I stay?" William's heart clenched. "You don't stay by being good," he said firmly. "You stay by being here." She searched his face. "What if I make mistakes?" "Then you'll make them," he said. "Like everyone else." She frowned, uncertain. "I'm not sending you away for being human," he added. Her shoulders sagged, exhaustion finally breaking through. She nodded once. William led her back to the guest room, stopping at Henry's door. Annie peeked inside, confirmed he was sleeping, then returned to her bed. "Will you be here when I wake up?" she asked. "Yes," William said. She closed her eyes. William stood in the hallway long after she fell asleep. He knew the road ahead would not be smooth. Systems would push back. Questions would multiply. Doubts would creep in. But standing there, listening to the quiet breathing of a child who had learned too early how easily things could be taken away, he understood something essential. Stability was not a gift. It was a practice, one he was prepared to commit to. The days that followed settled into a cautious rhythm, one Annie did not yet trust, but learned to observe carefully. Mornings began with quiet footsteps in the hallway, the soft clink of dishes, the low murmur of adult voices that did not sharpen into anger. Afternoons brought doctor's calls, follow-up schedules, the steady routine of Henry's recovery. Evenings ended with lights dimmed early, the house sinking into a calm that felt almost deliberate. Annie watched all of it. She noticed how William always paused before entering Henry's room, knocking even when the door was open. She noticed how Mrs. Finch asked before touching her shoulder, how the staff spoke to her slowly without raising their voices. These were small things, but Annie understood small things. Small things were how you knew whether a place was safe. On the fourth morning, William found her sitting at the dining table with a notebook Mrs. Finch had given her. She was copying letters carefully, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth in concentration. "You write well," William said. She startled slightly, then relaxed when she recognized his voice. "I practiced," she said. "At the library sometimes." "You like school?" he asked. She hesitated. "I like learning," she said finally. "School is loud." "That's fair," he replied. She looked up at him. "Am I going back?" "Yes," he said. "But not until we talk about what you need." Even. Her pencil paused mid-stroke. "People don't usually ask that." "I'm learning," he said. She nodded, accepting that. Later that day, Linda Morales returned. This time, she brought a man with her older, quieter, with a legal pad tucked under his arm. Annie stiffened immediately. "This is Mr. Harris," Linda said. He helps me understand family arrangements. Annie glanced at William. He met her gaze steadily. You can stay, he said. Or you can sit with Mrs. Finch. Your choice. Away. She considered this carefully, then pulled her chair closer to the table. I'll stay. The meeting was calm but thorough. They discussed Henry's prognosis, Annie's schooling, supervision requirements. Words like guardianship and temporary custody floated through the room like unfamiliar weather. Annie listened closely, interrupting only once. If Grandpa gets better, she asked. Do I have to leave? The room went quiet. William answered before anyone else could. No decisions will be made without you, he said. And no one is rushing anything. Mr. Harris looked at him over his glasses. That's an unusual approach. It's an honest one, William replied. Annie watched both men, her face unreadable. When the meeting ended, Linda lingered behind. She's very aware, she said quietly. She has to be, William replied. Linda nodded. Just make sure she doesn't have to be forever. That night, Henry slept deeply for the first time since leaving the hospital. Annie sat on the floor beside his bed, back against the wall, counting quietly. William found her there when he checked in. You should be in bed, he said gently. I will, she replied. After I get to 10. 10 what? Breaths, she said. If he gets to 10, it's okay. William waited with her until she reached 10. Now bed, he said. She nodded and stood, wobbling slightly from fatigue. At the doorway, she stopped. You didn't leave today. No, he said. You didn't even look like you wanted to. He smiled faintly. I wanted to stay. She absorbed that quietly. A week passed. Henry's color improved. His appetite returned. He laughed once at something Annie said, a soft sound that made her freeze, then smile cautiously, as if afraid it might vanish if she acknowledged it too quickly. One afternoon, William found Annie in the backyard, sitting on the grass, shoes neatly placed beside her. She was watching ants move along the edge of the stone path. They work all the time, she said. Yes, William replied. But they don't look scared, she added. He sat beside her. They know where they belong. She looked at him sharply. People don't always. No, he agreed. She picked at a blade of grass. Do I belong here? William didn't answer immediately. He knew the weight of the question. I think, he said slowly, that belonging isn't about places. It's about whether people show up when it matters. She considered this. You showed up? Yes. And you keep showing up? Yes. She nodded, as if confirming something important. That evening, Henry joined them at the table for dinner. It was the first time he had done so without visible strain. Annie hovered until he sat, then took her place. You're fussing, Henry teased gently. I'm checking, she replied. William watched the exchange, the quiet affection. The way Annie's shoulders finally lowered a fraction. Healing, he realized, did not announce itself. It crept in quietly, unnoticed until you looked back and saw how far you'd come. Later, as Annie prepared for bed, she paused in the doorway of William's study. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. If Grandpa gets all better, she said slowly, and we leave, will you forget me? The question was barely a whisper. William stood and crossed the room, stopping a respectful distance away. No, he said firmly. I wouldn't forget you if you left tomorrow, and I won't forget you if you stay. She searched his face. Why? Because you matter, he said. Not because of what you need, but because of who you are. Her eyes filled, just slightly. She nodded, turned, and went to bed without another word. William remained standing long after she left. He understood now that this was no longer about providing shelter or navigating systems. It was about something deeper, something more demanding. It was about proving, day after day, that care could be consistent, that presence could be trusted, that promises did not have to be temporary. And for the first time in a very long while, William Carter felt certain he was exactly where he needed to be. Laughter. It came from the kitchen, low and unexpected, and it stopped her in the hallway. She stood very still, listening. trying to decide whether it was real or something her mind had made up. Laughter, in her experience, was brief. It appeared suddenly and disappeared just as fast. She edged closer. Henry was seated at the table, his cane resting against the chair, his shoulders no longer drawn as tightly as before. Mrs. Finch stood near the counter, shaking her head with a small smile. William leaned against the far side of the table, one hand resting casually on the wood. "I'm telling you," Henry said, amusement warming his voice. "That boy thought he could lift twice his weight." "And did he?" William asked. Henry snorted. "Not even close." Nearly dropped it on his foot. Mrs. Finch laughed again, softer this time. Annie froze in the doorway. Henry noticed her first. "There you are," he said. "Come here, little boss." "Oh, bye." She stepped forward cautiously, as if afraid the moment might break if she moved too fast. "What's funny?" she asked. "Your grandpa is telling stories," Mrs. Finch said. "Very dramatic ones." Henry smiled at Annie. "I used to be stronger than I looked." She studied him carefully, then nodded. "You still are." Something flickered across his face. Pride, surprise, emotion held carefully in check. Annie climbed into her chair, glancing at William as she did. He met her gaze briefly and nodded, as if to say, "Yes, this is real. You're allowed to be here." After breakfast, Henry rested while Annie helped Mrs. Finch fold laundry. She folded each towel with exaggerated precision, aligning edges until they were perfectly straight. "You don't have to make them perfect," Mrs. Finch said gently. "I know," Annie replied. "But I like when things line up." Mrs. Finch nodded. "So do I." In the study, William spoke with Mr. Harris over the phone. "Yes," he said. "School enrollment is next week." "No, I don't intend to rush her." He paused, listening. "I understand the concern," he continued. "But removing stability because it might create attachment is counterproductive." Another pause. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'm aware of the precedent." When he ended the call, he pressed his hands together briefly, then released them. The familiar gesture no longer surprised him. It had become a signal, an anchor. That afternoon, Annie followed William into the backyard. The sun was mild, the air cool. She stood watching as he knelt to inspect a loose stone along the path. "Are you fixing it?" she asked. "Yes. Can I help?" He hesitated. "You can hold the stone steady." She knelt beside him immediately, small hands gripping the edge carefully. "Don't push yet," he said. "I won't." They worked in silence for a moment. "William?" she asked suddenly. "Yes? Why do people get scared when kids like me ask for things?" He paused, considering. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "people confuse need with weakness, and weakness makes them uncomfortable." "I'm not weak," she said quickly. "No," he agreed. "You're not." She absorbed that quietly. Later, Linda Morales returned unexpectedly. Annie saw her through the window and stiffened instantly. "She's here," Annie said. "I know," William replied calmly. "Do you want to stay inside or come with me?" Annie hesitated. "Will she be mad if I come?" "No." She nodded and followed him. Linda smiled when she saw Annie. "Hello again." "Hi," Annie replied cautiously. "I brought something," Linda said, pulling a thin folder from her bag. "Information about schools nearby." Annie glanced at William, then took the folder. She didn't open it, but she held it carefully, as if it were fragile. "You'll have a say," Linda added. "About where you go." "One hoed." Annie frowned. "Really?" "Yes," Linda said. "Really?" Annie studied her face. "Okay." After Linda left, Annie sat on the stairs, staring at the folder. "Do I have to be good at school?" she asked. "You have to be you," William said. "What if teachers get mad? Then we talk to them. What if kids don't like me? Then we figure out why," he said. "And if there's no good reason, we remember that not everyone will." She nodded slowly. "That's a lot of talking." "Yes," he said. "It is." That night, Henry joined them in the living room. He sat in a chair by the window, blanket over his knees. Annie curled up on the rug with a book Mrs. Finch had found. "Read to me," Henry said. Annie hesitated. I'm not very fast. That's fine, he replied. I've got time. She began haltingly, stumbling over longer words. Henry listened patiently, never correcting, never rushing her. William watched from across the room, a quiet weight settling in his chest. This ordinary, fragile moment felt more consequential than any meeting he'd attended in years. Halfway through the story, Annie paused. Grandpa? Yes? Do you think, when people help each other, they get stronger? Henry smiled. I think that's the only way they do. She nodded and continued reading. Later, when Henry had gone to bed and the house had quieted, Annie lingered near the stairs. William? She said. Yes. Today felt normal, she said carefully. Is that bad? He shook his head. No. It's a good sign. She smiled faintly. I liked it. He returned the smile. As Annie went upstairs, William remained where he was, thinking about everything that still lay ahead. Court dates, evaluations, questions that would not be easy to answer. But tonight, there had been laughter, folding towels, a loose stone set back into place, and a child who, for the first time, had asked whether normal was allowed. Not the violent kind, but a steady, patient drizzle that softened the edges of the world. Annie stood at the window, watching droplets race each other down the glass. She liked the way rain made everything slower, quieter. It gave people an excuse to stay inside. Is it a school day? She asked, without turning around. Not yet, William replied from the doorway. Soon, she nodded, absorbing the word like a promise and a threat all at once. Henry shuffled into the room a moment later, wrapped in his sweater, cane tapping lightly against the floor. Rain's good, he said. Means the ground remembers how to breathe. Annie glanced at him. You say weird things, he smiled. That's how you know I'm feeling better. After breakfast, William drove Henry to a follow-up appointment. Annie sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, clutching the folder Linda had given her. She hadn't opened it yet. You don't have to decide anything today, William said, catching her gaze in the mirror. I know, she replied. I just like knowing where things are. At the clinic, Henry was taken in first. Annie and William sat side by side in the waiting room. A television murmured in the corner, ignored. Do you want to look at the schools? William asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. He slid the folder toward her. She opened it carefully, page by page. Photos of classrooms, playgrounds, smiling children. Each image made her frown a little more. They look loud, she said. Some are, William admitted. Do they make you raise your hand? She asked. Yes. What if you don't raise it fast enough? Then sometimes you don't get called on. She closed the folder. I don't like that. He studied her. What would you like instead? She thought for a long moment. I like when people wait. He nodded. Then we'll find a place that knows how. I have due one. When Henry returned, the doctor's report was cautiously optimistic. Medication was working. Recovery would be slow, but steady. Annie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. On the drive home, rain tapped against the roof in a gentle rhythm. Annie leaned her head against the window, eyes half closed. William? She asked suddenly. Yes. If Grandpa gets strong again, will I still be allowed to be tired? The question hit harder than he expected. Yes, he said quietly. You're allowed to be tired now. She nodded, satisfied. That afternoon, Linda Morales called. William took the call in his study, voice low but firm. Annie hovered nearby, pretending not to listen. Yes, William said. We've discussed options. No, I don't think moving her right now is in her best interest. Pause. I'm aware, he continued. And I'm prepared to formalize temporary guardianship if necessary. Annie's breath caught. When he ended the call, she stepped closer. What does that mean? It means, he said carefully, that if things go well, I'll be responsible for you for a while. Officially, she searched his face. And Grandpa? He stays with us, William said. As long as he needs. She nodded slowly. Okay. That night, Henry asked Annie to bring him his book. She handed it to him carefully, then lingered. You can go play, he said gently. I don't need to, she replied. Henry smiled. You don't always have to choose what's needed. Resided axes of Godded. She frowned. Then what do I choose? He thought for a moment. What you want. She considered this as if it were a foreign language. Later, Annie sat alone in the living room, the folder open again. William joined her, sitting on the opposite couch. I don't want them to think I'm bad, she said suddenly. Who? Teachers, kids, everyone. They won't, he said. She shook her head. They might, yes, he admitted. Some people might. She looked at him sharply. Then why try? Because, he said, you deserve to be seen as more than what you've survived. She stared at the pictures again. What if they ask about my parents? William inhaled slowly. Then we decide what you want to say. Or not say. You won't make me? No. She closed the folder. I like that. The rain stopped just before bedtime. The world outside looked newly washed, unfamiliar but calmer. Annie paused at the top of the stairs. William? Yes. Bragdon, Delmist. If this doesn't work, will you tell me first? Yes, he said without hesitation. Always. She nodded and went to bed. William remained downstairs, staring at the quiet house. He knew the next steps would bring paperwork, scrutiny, and difficult conversations. He knew there would be moments when even good intentions weren't enough. But he also knew this. Trust was not built by certainty. It was built by honesty, repeated over time. And tonight, Annie had not asked whether she would be sent away. She had asked whether she was allowed to be tired. That, more than anything, told him how far they had already come. Annie noticed it first. William was still calm, still steady, but there was a new carefulness in the way he moved through the house. He double-checked his phone more often. He paused longer before answering questions. Annie watched all of it from the margins, the way she always had, reading the air before reading the words. Henry, on the other hand, was stronger. He walked the length of the hallway without stopping, his cane tapping less frequently against the floor. Look at that, he said with a quiet pride. Doctor won't believe me. Annie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Mrs. Finch placed it on the kitchen counter without comment, but Annie saw the official seal immediately. Her stomach tightened. William picked it up, read it once, then folded it neatly. Is it bad? Annie asked. No, he said. It's important. She nodded. Important was worse than bad. They sat at the table together, the letter between them like a third presence. It's a formal review, William explained. They want to evaluate what's best for you long term. Annie clasped her hands together. They always say that. I know, he said. This time, you'll be part of the conversation. She looked up sharply. Really? Yes. What if I say the wrong thing? There's no wrong thing, he replied. There's only the truth. She considered this, then nodded slowly. That evening, Henry found Annie sitting on the back steps, staring out at the yard. You're thinking too loud, he said gently, lowering himself beside her. I don't want to mess this up, she said. Henry studied her profile. Mess what up? All of it, she replied. This. You getting better. William helping. If I say something wrong, they might think I don't belong here. Henry smiled sadly. You've been thinking about belonging your whole life, haven't you? She didn't answer. Listen to me, he said, his voice firmer than usual. You don't belong because someone lets you. You belong because you exist. She frowned. People don't act like that's true. No, he agreed. But that doesn't make them right. The day of the review arrived too quickly. Linda Morales returned, this time with 2 additional representatives. They sat in the living room, notebooks open, expressions neutral but alert. Annie sat between William and Henry, feet dangling, posture straight. One of the men smiled politely. Annie, we're just going to ask you a few questions. She nodded once. Okay. What do you like about living here? He asked. She thought carefully. People knock, she said. There was a pause. They wait for answers, she continued, and they explain things. The woman beside him made a note. And what do you miss about your old home? Another asked. Annie's hands tightened. My grandpa's chair, she said. The window. Henry shifted slightly. What do you want to happen next? Linda asked. Annie looked at William, then at Henry. I want Grandpa to get better. she said. And I want to go to school. That's quiet. And I don't want to move again for a long time. Silence settled. William spoke then, calmly. That's reasonable. The meeting ended without conclusions, only assurances. More discussions, more time. After they left, Annie went very still. Did I do okay? She asked. William crouched in front of her. You did exactly right. That night, Annie dreamed again, but this time, the gate opened. She woke before dawn and sat up, heart racing, then realized where she was. Slowly, she lay back down, something unfamiliar spreading through her chest. Relief. In the morning, she followed William into the kitchen. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. If they say I can't stay forever, she said slowly. Will you still help us? William met her gaze without hesitation. Yes. Oh, way. Even if it's hard? Yes. She nodded, accepting that answer not as comfort, but as fact. Later that day, Annie found herself laughing, really laughing, when Henry tried to carry too many groceries at once and nearly lost his balance. You're not ready for that, she teased. Don't get used to it, he replied. I'll be running soon. She smiled, wide and unguarded, and for a brief moment, forgot to worry. William watched from across the room. He knew the system would take time. He knew there would be more letters, more meetings, more moments when Annie's small shoulders would tense again. But he also knew something else now. She was no longer standing alone in front of a gate, hands clasped, asking to be let in. She was inside, and whatever came next, he intended to make sure she never had to ask for permission to belong again. William answered it in the kitchen, his voice low. Annie, sitting at the table with a bowl of oatmeal, watched him closely. She didn't understand the words, but she recognized the pause, the one where adults listened harder than they spoke. Yes, William said. I understand. He glanced toward Annie, then turned slightly away. No, that won't be necessary, he continued. I'll be there in person. When he ended the call, Annie didn't pretend not to notice. Is something wrong? She asked. Something important, he replied, choosing the words carefully. She nodded. Important again. It's about your grandfather, William added. And about next steps. Annie's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. Is he worse? No, William said quickly. He's improving. This is about what happens after. Henry entered the kitchen moments later, moving more steadily than he had the week before. What happens after what? He asked. William met his gaze. After you're fully recovered. Henry exhaled slowly and sat down. I figured this was coming. The meeting took place downtown, in a building that felt deliberately impersonal. Glass walls, neutral colors, chairs arranged in careful symmetry. Annie noticed all of it. She sat between William and Henry again, feet not quite touching the floor. A woman with silver hair spoke first. Mr. Carter, Mr. Lewis, she said, nodding to Henry. Thank you for coming. Annie braced herself. We've reviewed the case, the woman continued. Mr. Lewis's health is improving. That changes certain considerations. Henry nodded. I expected that. We need to discuss long-term stability for Annie, another official added, including housing and guardianship. Annie clasped her hands together. She's stable now, William said calmly, emotionally and physically. Yes, the woman agreed. But the question is permanence. Henry leaned forward slightly. She's my granddaughter, he said. She belongs with me. Silence settled. William didn't interrupt. He let Henry speak. I couldn't take care of her before, Henry continued. I know that. I was sick. I was scared. But I'm getting stronger. I can work again. Slowly. Annie turned to him. You don't have to, she whispered. Henry smiled gently. I want to. The officials exchanged looks. Mr. Lewis, the woman said carefully. We need to ensure Annie's needs are met long-term. Education, supervision, stability, Henry nodded. And I need help with that. All eyes turned to William. I'm willing to provide that help, William said. Ongoing. The man beside the woman frowned slightly. In what capacity? William didn't hesitate. As a guardian, if needed. Annie's breath caught. Henry turned sharply. William held up a hand. This isn't about replacing anyone, he said. It's about partnership. The room went quiet. Annie looked between them, heart pounding. Does that mean I have to choose? She asked suddenly. The officials startled slightly. No, William said immediately. You don't have to choose. I don't want Grandpa to feel bad, Annie said quickly. And I don't want to leave. Henry reached for her hand. You won't, he said. Not if I can help it. The woman with silver hair leaned forward. Annie, she said gently. What do you want? Annie swallowed. Her voice was small, but steady. I want Grandpa to be safe, she said. And I want to stay where people knock. And I want to go to a school that's quiet. The woman nodded slowly. That's very clear. After the meeting, they walked out together into the open air. Annie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for hours. Did we do okay? She asked. Yes, William said. Henry squeezed her hand. You were brave. She frowned. I wasn't scared. Henry smiled sadly. That's what brave feels like sometimes. That evening, Henry surprised them both. I'm going back to the old apartment, he said. Annie froze. Because I need to prove something, he said gently. To myself. And to them. William studied him. You don't have to do that. I do, Henry replied. But I don't want Annie there alone. She won't be, William said. She'll stay with me. Annie's heart lurched. But you said, I said we'd decide together, William said. This doesn't change that. Henry knelt in front of her, a little unsteadily. This is temporary, he said. Just until I know I can stand on my own. Annie searched his face. You promise? Henry nodded. I promise. That night, Annie couldn't sleep. William found her sitting on the stairs, hugging her knees. I don't like waiting, she said. I know, he replied, sitting beside her. What if Grandpa decides he doesn't need help anymore? She asked. Then we talk, William said. And if they make us stop talking? They won't, he said firmly. And if they try, I'll argue again. She smiled faintly. You argue a lot. Yes, he said, for the right reasons. She leaned her head against the wall. I don't want to lose anyone. William closed his eyes briefly. Neither do I. The next morning, Henry packed a small bag. Annie helped him fold shirts, carefully aligning the edges. You'll come visit, he said. Yes, she replied. Every day if I can. Was not did. William watched them from the doorway, aware that this was another test, another moment where fear could undo progress. But as Henry left, he turned back one last time. Take care of her, he said to William. I will, William replied. Annie stood very still until the door closed. Then she turned to William. You're still here, she said. Yes, he replied. She nodded, letting the fact settle into her bones. For the first time since the meeting, she allowed herself to breathe. Henry's chair sat empty at the breakfast table. His mug remained where he'd left it, clean but unused. Annie paused in the doorway, eyes lingering on the space as if expecting him to appear at any moment, apologizing for being late. He left early, Mrs. Finch said gently. So the traffic wouldn't bother him. Annie nodded, though the explanation didn't ease the hollow feeling in her chest. She took her seat anyway, placing her hands neatly in her lap. William watched her carefully but said nothing. He had learned that naming loss too quickly could make it heavier. After breakfast, Annie wandered the house without purpose, touching familiar objects, the banister, the edge of the couch, the back of Henry's chair like checkpoints, confirming that things still existed. She stopped by the front door and pressed her palm against the wood. Are you thinking about him? William asked softly from behind her. Yes, she replied, and about if he's tired. He knows how to rest, William said. She considered this. He didn't before. He's learning, William replied. Just like you are. She turned to him. Am I? Yes. She accepted that quietly. That afternoon, William drove Annie to see the school Linda had suggested, the quiet one. The building was small, the playground modest. Children moved in clusters rather than crowds. A teacher greeted them with a calm smile and waited for Annie to speak first. I don't like loud bells, Annie said bluntly. The teacher nodded. We use soft music instead. Annie glanced at William, surprised. Can I sit by the window? She asked. If you want, the teacher replied. Annie nodded again. the familiar gesture of cautious approval. On the drive home, she was quiet for a long time. "I think," she said finally, "I could try it." William smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can ask." Grack. When they returned to the house, Annie found a small package waiting on the table. Her name was written on it in careful handwriting. "It's from your grandpa," William said. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a small notebook and a note, "So you can write things down when your head gets too loud. Love, Grandpa." Annie pressed the notebook to her chest, swallowing hard. That evening, she sat on the floor near the couch, writing slowly, carefully. William read nearby, glancing up occasionally to make sure she was still there. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Rules," she replied. "Rules for what?" "For staying," she said. "Things I should remember." He hesitated. "What kind of things?" She thought for a moment. "Like, don't forget to say thank you. And don't break things. And don't make trouble." William set his book aside. "Annie," he said gently, "those aren't rules for staying." She looked up, confused. "They're not?" "No," he said. "They're habits you learn to survive." She stared at the page. "What are rules for staying then?" He considered this carefully. "Rules for staying," he said, "are things like telling the truth, asking for help, and knowing you're allowed to make mistakes." She frowned. "Those sound dangerous." "They can be," he admitted. "But they're also how people learn you're real." She looked back at the notebook and crossed out a line, then wrote something new. "Tell the truth even when it's scary." Later that night, Annie dreamed again, but this time, Henry was standing in the doorway, smiling, not leaving but arriving. She woke with tears on her cheeks, confused by the ache and the comfort tangled together. William heard her moving and found her sitting on the bed, clutching the notebook. "Bad dream?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just a lot," he nodded. "That happens. Will Grandpa come back?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "He will." "Oh, and you'll still be here?" "Yes." She lay back down, comforted more by the certainty than the words themselves. The next day brought a phone call from Henry. Annie listened quietly as William put the call on speaker. "I walked to the corner store today," Henry said proudly. Slow, but steady. Annie smiled. "Did you rest after?" "Yes, boss," Henry replied, amused. "I rested." After the call, Annie sat very still for a moment, then looked up at William. "Can people have more than one safe place?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes they need to." She nodded. "I think I do." That evening, Annie stood in front of the mirror before bed, studying her reflection with a seriousness beyond her years. "I don't look different," she said. "No," William replied. "You don't have to." She smiled faintly. "I feel a little different." He nodded. "That's how it starts." 1. As the house quieted, William stood at the window, watching the lights of the city blink on one by one. He knew this phase, this fragile calm, would not last forever. There would be setbacks, doubts, moments when Annie would retreat into herself again. But tonight, she had written her own rule, and for a child who once believed staying meant earning her place, that was a quiet revolution. Annie's first day at the new school arrived wrapped in pale morning light. She stood at the foot of the stairs, backpack on, shoes perfectly tied, posture rigid as if bracing for impact. William noticed immediately. "You don't have to be ready," he said gently. "You just have to go." She nodded. "I can do that." The drive was short. Too short, Annie thought. She watched the buildings pass, counting her breaths the way she'd learned to do when her chest felt tight. At the school entrance, children moved calmly, voices low. No shouting, no whistles. Annie's shoulders eased a fraction. The teacher met them at the door. "Good morning, Annie," she said, using her name as if it mattered. Annie hesitated, then replied, "Good morning." William didn't go inside. He knelt briefly, meeting her eyes. "I'll be here," he said. Same time. She nodded once and walked in without looking back. The classroom smelled like paper and something faintly sweet. The window seat was empty. Annie slid into it carefully. She did not speak much that day. She listened. She observed. She noticed which children talked easily and which stayed quiet. She noticed the way the teacher paused before answering questions, the way silence was allowed to exist without punishment. At lunch, she ate slowly, watching others more than her food. A girl across from her smiled. "I like your notebook," the girl said. Annie blinked. "It helps me remember things." End quote. "That's cool," the girl replied simply, then returned to her sandwich. Annie didn't smile, but something loosened inside her chest. When William picked her up, she climbed into the car and buckled herself in before speaking. "It wasn't loud," she said. He smiled. "That's good. And no one yelled. Even better." She looked out the window. "I think I can go back tomorrow." That evening, Henry called again. Annie told him about the window seat, about the soft music, about the girl who didn't ask too many questions. Henry listened quietly. "Sounds like a good place," he said. "I think so," Annie replied. "But I still miss you." "I know," he said. "I miss you too." After the call, Annie sat with her notebook open, pen hovering. She added a new line. "Some places don't hurt." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. School in the mornings, quiet afternoons, short visits from Henry when he was strong enough. Each visit ended with a promise. Each goodbye a little less sharp than the last. But not everything was gentle. One afternoon, Annie overheard voices in the hallway. Raised voices, tense voices. "Temporary," someone said. "Not permanent." Her stomach dropped. She didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She retreated to her room and sat on the floor, back against the bed, notebook clutched tight. When William found her later, her eyes were dry but distant. "You're leaving," she said flatly. He sat down slowly. "Why do you think that?" "I heard you," she replied. "People always say temporary before they go." He took a breath. "Nothing has been decided." She looked at him, eyes sharp. "That's not the same as no." He nodded. "You're right." Silence stretched between them. "What happens if Grandpa gets better?" she asked. "Then we celebrate," William said. "And we make plans together." "And if they say I have to go with him?" she pressed. "Then we talk," he said. "And we find a way that doesn't break you." Her hands trembled. "What if they don't care about that?" William's voice lowered. "Then I will." She searched his face, looking for cracks, for uncertainty. She didn't find any. That night, Annie dreamed of the gate again, but this time, she stood in front of it holding a key. She didn't know which door it opened, only that it was hers. She woke before dawn and wrote furiously in her notebook. "I am not something people pass around. I am not a problem to solve." In the morning, she handed the notebook to William without explanation. He read it once. Then again. "This is important," he said quietly. She shrugged. "It's just true." Later that week, Henry returned to the house for dinner. He walked slowly, but without the cane. Annie watched every step. "You're stronger," she said. "Careful," he replied. "I might start believing that." At the table, the conversation flowed easily until Henry cleared his throat. "I had another meeting today," he said. Annie froze. "With the doctors," he continued. "They say I could live independently again, in time." Annie's chest tightened. "That's good." "It is," Henry agreed. "But I told them something else." William looked up. "I told them Annie shouldn't be uprooted again," Henry said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Annie stared at him. "But you're my grandpa, and I always will be," he said. "That doesn't change because you're safe somewhere else." Tears burned her eyes. "I don't want to choose." "You don't have to," Henry said gently. "Love isn't a courtroom." William watched the exchange, heart heavy and full all at once. That night, Annie stood at the window again, watching the city lights. She pressed her palm against the glass, just as she had weeks before, but this time, she wasn't waiting to be let in. She was already home. It sat on the hallway table all morning. Its envelope cream-colored and heavy, the kind adults pretended not to worry about. Annie noticed it the moment she came down the stairs. She noticed how William slowed when he saw it too. "Is that for me?" she asked. "Yes," William replied. She nodded once. "I'll read it later." That answer surprised him, but he didn't question it. The day unfolded carefully. Breakfast, school, the quiet rhythm Annie had grown used to. But under it all, something hummed anticipation, like the air before a storm. At school, Annie couldn't focus. The window seat no longer felt steady. Her fingers tapped her notebook again and again. What if this is the part where things change, she thought. When William picked her up, she climbed into the car silently, letter still unopened in her bag. "You don't have to read it today," he said, as if reading her mind. "I know," she replied, "but not reading it doesn't stop it from being true." At home, Henry was already there, sitting in the living room. He looked better, stronger, color back in his face, but there was something solemn in his eyes. Annie stopped short. "You came early. I wanted to be here," he said. The letter was placed on the table between them. 3 people. 1 piece of paper. Annie reached for it at last. Her hands were steady. She opened it slowly, reading each line twice. Temporary guardianship approved. Review scheduled in 6 months. Recommendation: continuity of placement. She frowned. "What does that mean?" William exhaled. "It means you stay here," he said. "For now. And likely longer." Annie blinked. "For real?" Henry smiled. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She simply sat down hard on the couch, as if her legs had finally decided to stop holding her up. "So I don't have to pack?" she asked. "No," William said. "So I can finish the school year?" She pressed. "Yes. So I can stop worrying every time someone knocks?" Her voice cracked on the last word. William's answer was immediate. "Yes." Something inside her broke, then not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to let the relief pour through. She pressed her face into Henry's shoulder and breathed him in. "I didn't know how tired I was," she whispered. Henry rested his chin on her head. "That's because you've been strong for too long." That night, Annie didn't write rules. She didn't list fears. She didn't plan ahead. She slept, deeply, without dreams. The days that followed brought subtle shifts. Annie laughed more easily. She stopped flinching when doors closed. She argued small arguments, harmless ones about bedtime and vegetables and homework. William noticed all of it. "Is this normal?" she asked him once, after snapping at him over spilled milk and immediately apologizing. "Yes," he said. "That's what safety looks like." She considered that. "It's messy." "It is," he agreed. "But it's real." Henry began spending nights at his apartment again, testing his strength, proving to himself he could manage. But every weekend, he came back for dinner. One Saturday afternoon, Annie helped him water the plants in the garden. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked suddenly. Henry paused. "No," he said. "I'm just learning how to stand again." She nodded. "You can come sit when you're tired." "I know," he smiled. "That's why I'm not afraid anymore." Later that week, Annie was assigned a project at school. Family tree. She stared at the paper for a long time. That evening, she slid the assignment across the table to William. "I don't know how to do this," she said. He studied it. "There's more than one way to draw a family." She looked up. "There is?" "Yes," he said. "Some families are straight lines. Some are circles. Some overlap. Very do." She picked up a pencil. Her tree had roots that twisted and branched in unexpected ways. Henry, William, teachers, Mrs. Finch, even the girl from lunch who smiled without asking questions. At the bottom, she wrote one sentence: "People who stayed." The presentation day made her nervous. Her hands shook as she stood in front of the class. "This is my family," she said. "It doesn't look like one thing, but it works." No one laughed. Afterward, the teacher pulled her aside. "That was very brave," she said. Annie frowned. "I wasn't scared." The teacher smiled softly. "That's how you know you're healing." That evening, Annie stood on the balcony with William, watching the city settle into night. "Do you ever worry it'll go away?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted. "Then why don't you panic?" she pressed. He considered this. "Because even if things change, the time we had was real. No one can take that." She nodded slowly. "I like that answer." She leaned against the railing, looking out at the lights. For the first time since the night she stood shaking outside a gate, Annie did not feel like she was waiting for something to end. She was already living inside the middle of her life. And for now, That was enough. The city was warming toward spring. The trees outside the house showed the first stubborn hints of green, and the air carried that restless promise of change. Annie noticed it on her walk to school, the way the light lingered a little longer in the afternoon, the way people moved as if they expected something good. At breakfast, she spoke before anyone else. "My presentation went okay," she said. William looked up from his coffee. "Okay?" No one laughed, she clarified. "And Mrs. Adler said my family tree was honest." Henry, who had stayed the night, smiled. "Honest is better than perfect." Annie nodded. "I think so too." That afternoon, William received another call. He did not hide it this time. He answered openly, voice calm, posture relaxed. "Yes," he said. "I expected that." Pause. "No, she doesn't know yet. I wanted to discuss it with her first." 1. Annie watched from the hallway, heart beginning to beat faster, but not wildly, just enough to remind her to stay alert. When he hung up, she stepped forward. "You don't have to pretend," she said. William studied her face, then nodded. "You're right." They sat at the kitchen table together, sunlight stretching across the wood. "They want to move forward with permanent guardianship," he said. Annie blinked once. "Permanent means?" "It means no more reviews," he said gently. "No more waiting every few months to see if someone changes their mind." She folded her hands together. "And Grandpa?" Henry cleared his throat. "I was part of the call," he said. "They asked my opinion." Annie looked at him sharply. "What did you say?" Henry did not look away. "I said the truth. That you are safest where you are loved, and that loving you doesn't require owning you." Her chest tightened. "But I'm your family." "Yes," Henry said softly. "And you always will be." "Hey," William spoke carefully. "This doesn't erase anything," he said. "It just gives you stability. Legally." Annie stared at the table, at the faint scratches in the wood, the proof of years of use. "Do I have to decide now?" "No," William said immediately. "You don't have to decide at all today." She nodded, absorbing the permission like oxygen. That night, Annie lay awake longer than usual. She stared at the ceiling, notebook open beside her. The words did not come easily. She thought of the gate. She thought of the window seat. She thought of Henry's promise and William's certainty. Finally, she wrote one line. "Staying doesn't mean leaving someone else behind." The next day at school, Annie was distracted again, but this time not by fear. By curiosity. What would it be like, she wondered, to stop preparing for goodbye? At recess, the girl who had smiled at her during lunch weeks ago sat beside her. "My mom says we might move this summer," the girl said casually. "I don't like it." Annie considered this. "Do you get to help decide?" The girl shrugged. "Not really." Annie nodded. "That's hard." It was the first time she had comforted someone else without feeling responsible for fixing them. That evening, Henry took Annie for a walk around the block. The air was cool, but gentle. "You don't owe me anything," he said suddenly. Annie stopped walking. "I didn't say I did." "Oh, I know," he replied. "But sometimes children think love is a debt." She frowned. "Love isn't math." Henry chuckled. "Exactly." They continued walking. "If you stay with William," Henry went on, "I won't disappear." Annie looked up at him. "Promise?" "I promise," he said. "I'll still call. Still visit. Still complain about your music." She smiled. "You complain about everything." "Yes," he agreed proudly. "That's how you'll know I'm still here." Odor. That night, Annie asked William a question she had been holding back. "If I say yes," she said, "will you ever send me away?" William didn't answer right away. "Not because it's easy," he said finally, "but because I believe in telling the truth." She nodded. "I like that." "I can't promise nothing will ever change," he continued. "But I can promise that I won't disappear without explanation. I won't pretend your feelings don't matter. And I won't walk away when things get hard." Annie swallowed. "That's a lot." "Yes," he said. "It is." She took a deep breath. "Then I think I want to stay." William felt his chest tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "Okay, really?" she asked, searching his face. "Yes," he said. "We'll do it together." The paperwork took weeks. Forms, signatures, conversations with people who spoke gently but carried authority in their voices. Annie attended when she wanted to, stayed away when she didn't. No one forced her. On the day it was finalized, no one celebrated loudly. There was no cake, no announcement. Instead, Henry cooked dinner. William set the table. Annie folded the napkins carefully, aligning the corners just right. "This feels normal," she said. Henry smiled. "That's the best kind of miracle." Later, Annie stood in her room, packing away old clothes that no longer fit, old habits that no longer served her. She placed the notebook on her shelf, not because she needed it less, but because she trusted it would still be there. Before bed, she paused in the doorway of William's study. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked. "For not turning away," she replied. He nodded. "Thank you for knocking." She went to bed without fear pressing against her ribs. For the first time, Annie understood something she had never been taught. Home was not a place you earned by being small and quiet. Home was a place that stayed. Spring had fully settled into the city. The trees outside the house wore green without apology, and the mornings carried birdsong instead of sirens. Annie noticed these things now. She noticed how the light touched the floor in the hallway at the same hour every day, how the house breathed differently when windows were open. She was setting the table when William came in, jacket still on, a folder tucked under his arm. "It's done," he said simply. Annie looked up. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. "Oh," she said. Then, after a moment, "Okay," that was all. No cheering. No tears. Just a quiet acceptance, like something settling into place at last. Henry arrived later that afternoon, walking without his cane, his steps careful but confident. Annie ran to him without thinking, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're late," she said. "I know," he replied. "I was taking the long way on purpose." Why? "So I could enjoy it," he said, smiling down at her. They sat together on the back porch as the sun dipped lower. The city hummed softly beyond the fence, present but distant. "So," Henry said, clearing his throat, "you're officially staying." Annie nodded. "I think I already was." He chuckled. "That sounds like you." William joined them with 3 glasses of lemonade. He handed one to Henry, one to Annie, then sat. "To boring miracles," Henry said, lifting his glass. Annie frowned. "What's that?" "Things that save your life without making noise," Henry replied. She considered this, then clinked her glass against his. "I like boring miracles." That night, Annie lay awake longer than usual, not because of fear, but because her mind felt full. She thought about the girl she had been outside the gate, hands clasped, asking for work instead of help. She thought about how small she had tried to make herself, how careful. She got up quietly and retrieved her notebook from the shelf. The pages were filled now. Rules crossed out, truths written over fear, lists that no longer controlled her. She turned to a blank page and wrote slowly, "I don't have to be quiet to stay. I don't have to be useful to be loved." She closed the notebook and put it back. The weeks that followed unfolded gently. Annie finished the school year with a window seat and a teacher who learned when not to push. She made one friend, then another. Not fast, not loud, but real. Henry moved back into his apartment fully, though he still came by twice a week for dinner and once just to complain about how William organized the pantry. William learned new things too. He learned how to wait through silence without filling it, how to listen to questions that weren't really questions, how to argue with institutions patiently, persistently, without turning bitter. One evening, months later, Annie stood on the same balcony where William often stood alone before she arrived in his life. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the city lights. "You used to think you didn't need anyone," she said casually. William smiled faintly. "I thought needing people made you weak. And now?" she asked. "Now I think pretending you don't need them is what makes you small," he replied. She nodded. "Grandpa says that too." They stood in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Often. I do too," she admitted. "But it doesn't hurt the same." "No," he agreed. "Because it led somewhere." She glanced up at him. "Not everyone gets that." "No," he said softly. That's why it matters that you did. Inside, Henry laughed at something on television, the sound warm and ordinary. Annie listened to it for a moment, then smiled. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Annie paused at William's door. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always," he replied. "If I grow up and mess things up," she said carefully. "Will you still answer my calls?" William didn't smile. He answered seriously. "Yes." "And if I leave?" she pressed. "Yes," he repeated. "And if you come back?" She nodded, satisfied. As she lay in bed, the city outside settling into sleep, Annie felt something she hadn't known how to name before. Belonging. Not the fragile kind that depended on good behavior or silence, but the solid kind, built from patience, from showing up again and again, from choosing not to turn away. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the city, a gate stood unused. A wall no longer needed leaning against. A child no longer measuring her worth by how little space she took. Annie slept peacefully, and in a quiet house filled with ordinary sounds and steady love. A story that began with a girl trembling in the dark finally ended with a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Home is not where you beg to be let in. Home is where someone opens the door and keeps it open. This story reminds us that true dignity is not earned through usefulness, silence, or suffering. It is inherent in every human being, no matter their age, color, or circumstance. Annie's journey shows that real justice is often quiet, found in the courage to see someone fully, to listen without judgment, and to refuse to turn away when it would be easier to do so. For those who have lived long enough to know loss and regret, the story speaks a deeper truth. Healing begins when we stop measuring worth by survival and start measuring it by love, responsibility, and the choice to stay. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.